as we have seen so far, the grid automatically places all the items in the order you have in your HTML file. But if you want, you can place items actively or explicitly in the grid. And to do that, we have a couple of attributes, and those you set on the items, the grid items. You can set the grid column start and the grid column end and the grid row start and end. And when you set these values, you can either set a number, and then it is the grid line that we set, and then we can also set a named track, and I will come back to that later. And finally, you can also set a span. So you can set span 2 or span 3 to tell that it spans 3 columns or rows in your grid. So let's go here. And in this case, now I have created a pre-made pen here. So let's go to that one and then create a fork. So I go here, and then we have this one, and to create a fork you click down here, and then it says forking pen, and then you can continue with this one. So now I have everything set up here, and as you can see, I just added some colors so we can see where things starts and ends. So now if I set up the display to grid, and then we should have 1 fraction, 4 fraction, 1 fraction. So grid template columns, 1 fraction, 4 fraction, 1 fraction. Like this. Maybe you should make this a little bit bigger. It doesn't wrap all the time. So now you can see that I have my head, my sidebar, my main, my adverts and footer. They are, if I don't do anything else, they are automatically placed in the grid. So now if I would like to place the page head to span the full width, well, then we saw that we should have the class is page head, and now I can say grid column start, and it should start at 1, and then I can set, and then we should have a semicolon also, and then I could add the grid column end. And now what is 1? Well, 1 is the first line that kind of is to the left edge. So this is number 2, and then we have number 3, and then we have number 4. So even if I have 3 columns, I have 4 grid lines. So now, as you can see, the head spans the full width. Then the sidebar, the main, and the adverts, well, they get placed correctly without me doing anything, but the footer should need the same as this one. So we could also add that one here and say also that the page foot should use the same here. And then we should have a period in the beginning. And now we have created a layout in the full way. I said that we could use the span in this way. So let's try this. Let's break out the page foot again, and let's do like this, and then let's add this one here. And then what happens now if I say grid column start and then say span 3? Well, it does the same. It now places itself where it kind of is from the beginning, and then it says it should span 3 columns. So this is kind of the same as I did before. So let's continue a little bit here. There is a short form from this also. You can just write grid column and grid row, and then you write start/end. So you can write it in another little bit more compound form. And then we can also combine the row and column into a grid area. So we can set that one up. Instead, if you would like anything to span more than 1 row, then you can use a grid area instead. So let's start with this one again and create a new codepen, and then try to see if we can use the grid area to recreate the previous layout. So let's, sorry, it should go here on this one. I thought I could click on that one. Now it doesn't want to. Yes, it was. Okay, so let's create a new fork, the same as before, and we set up the container to use a display of grid, and then we should have the grid template columns, and then we should have 1 fraction, 4 fraction, 1 fraction, like this. And again, make this a little bit wider. And then we take the page head, and then we should set up the grid area, and we say that it should be 1, 1, 4, 2. And now I got them in the opposite order, so it should be 2, it is a row, and then column, like that. And of course, if we are to create this one for the page foot, well, then we need to consider the grid area, and then we should say that it should start at row 3, and it should start at column 1, it should end at row 4, and it should end at column 4, like this. And now that spans the full width. And then of course we could again use span if we want to, but this is another way to achieve exactly the same as we did before. So I said that you can have named parts in the grid, and you can do that when you set up the grid template columns. You can name the first or the second or the third or all of them, and you do that by writing the name in square brackets. But then the easiest way to create names is to use the grid template areas. Because then you can kind of set up your layout via ASCII code, and that is super nice. So we can do like this. We write grid template areas, and then we can say, if I now write header, that means that as it is the same name, well, then the header part will span 2 columns in this way. And the same with footer. And as you can see, main spans 2 rows instead. So as soon as you use the same name on more than one place, as long as they are adjacent, then it will use that as one area. And then to specify the grid area, well, you just set the grid area and then write the name of that one instead. So if we have the ID like this, well, then we could set that one up. We have 3 fractions and 5 fractions in this one, and then we set up the grid template areas as header, and side 1 main, side 2 main, and footer, and then we get the layout like this. And then of course to specify this, you can do it in as complicated as you need and as you want. And then to specify the header is used in the header area, well, then instead of using what we did before, we just write the name of the area. So let's try this one. Let's go to this codepen and then try to recreate the design like this. And then we could say, can we do a mobile first? We have one column with a header, main, and sidebar. So let's go here and see if we can do that. We kind of have something here that maybe we would like to have main, sidebar, adverts, and footer. So let's see what we have here. Well, the container first. We should have a display of grid. And now, as I'm doing mobile first, I set up the grid template areas, and then I write header, and then I write main, and then I write in quotes it should be sidebar, and then I write adverts, and then I write footer. And of course I also need to have the grid template columns, and in my case now this is the mobile first, so I just set up one fraction because I only have one column, and this I actually don't need because this is the default that the grid should span the full width. So you see that it doesn't make any changes to this one, so this line is not needed. To place my items now, what I need to do is that I can go up here and I can say that the page head should have a grid area, and then I just say that this one, oops, I should have a colon, this should have the header, and then the sidebar should have the grid area of sidebar. And that should have moved that one. It didn't. Let's continue. The content area, that is my main part. So this should have a grid area of main. And now something is not working. And this called because I call it display and not display. Like this. Now you can see that when I got this correct, it moved. So now we have head, main, sidebar, adverts, and footer. And to make this proper, I will also add this as they are placed correctly as it is, but let's move them into the grid area of, this was the adverts, and finally the grid area of footer, grid area of footer, like this. Because now what we can do, if we go to the big screen, well, then we could set up a media query, media screen, and let's set up a mean width of, I don't know, 687 pixels. You can use whatever, of course. And now we would like to go into a 2-column layout, and then we can copy these two. Well, I can copy the full of that one and paste it here. And of course, the display grid is not needed, but this one, the grid template areas, should now be header, and then we should have an sidebar, main, and that one is not needed, and adverts, main, and then we should have a footer, and then we should have grid template columns, one fraction, or to make it correctly as we had, it was 3 fractions and 5 fractions. And now you can see that I have created a layout like this, and it kind of goes into 1-column layout when I get into the smaller screen. So now we know how to place items via ASCII code to create the layout simply by using ASCII code using grid template areas. But can we do a little bit more about responsive? Well, let's take that in the next movie.